Well, hello everybody. It's Real Talk with the Pimpcron yet again. And today I wanted to discuss the topic of, is life worth living without a hobby? And that might seem really, really dramatic, right? But it spurred me to ask this question and explore this idea when I was speaking to a friend the other day. And the friend said that all he does is he goes to work every single day and he comes home and he eats dinner and then he might have to like do something with his kids or do something with his wife or whatever, like, family stuff. And he might watch, an hour or two of TV and then he goes to bed. And then the following day he wakes up and starts it all over again, work and come home and dinner and blah blah blah. Not to mention work chores, not to mention like things you might have to do outside of work or things that you have to do in your yard chores or house improvements or whatever. Not including all those things, a good portion of his time is taken up with doing things for other people, such as his family or his employer or his job or whatever. And basically was like, "Oh man, I need a hobby." And I was telling him, really should get into some sort of hobby. It certainly doesn't have to be Warhammer. It doesn't have to be miniatures painting or miniatures wargaming or anything like that. But you really should have a hobby, whether it be going to the gym or literally anything. It could be playing chess online with people on a online chess game, or it could be playing an MMO, or it could be playing an RPG, or it could be woodworking or learning a skill or going to night classes or really whatever would interest you. Of course, anybody listening to this podcast would say that Warhammer is a good hobby because of the list building and the lore and the tactics and the assembling and the painting, and it's kind of like a very all-encompassing hobby versus something like, let's say, HeroClix, where you just buy the HeroClix and then you make your list and play, right? So to me, that seems like such a sad existence for a human being to have, is where work is your only thing you do outside the home. And anything you do inside the home is more or less wasting time. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not important to spend time with your family, your kids, your wife, whatever, but certainly he could cut out the television. Certainly he could find time for a hobby. And he seems very sad that he doesn't have a hobby, but he also seems very unmotivated to start one. But then again, he's not happy with the situation. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you got to do something. You got to mix stuff up. You got to try something else, right? So, to me personally, obviously there are many things that are worth living for. And this is not any sort of life-ending conversation. I'm not taking it that seriously. I'm just saying, what is the spice of life? What makes life worth living and enjoyable? Well, obviously, having children, being married, or having relationships, or even if you don't have all that stuff, having good friendly ties, or family ties, or church group, or club, or whatever you like to do. That is all things that make life more bearable, right? Outside your work obligations, outside all of your chores, that certainly makes life more bearable, and that is something you can enjoy. If you really like movies, I feel like that's a slight amount of waste of time, but if you truly do love movies, then watch a couple movies. Enjoy your life because you're only here so long. But to me, ignoring all of those philosophical things like what's the point of living, like as far as like living for your family and all that, really if you only serve other people and you only work towards your financial goals or your lifelong goals or your whatever, it's still a pretty mundane existence if you don't have some sort of hobby. And I know on the podcast probably a year ago we discussed eustress. It's EUSTRESS. And I read a whole article about it and covered it on the podcast where eustress is basically play. It's fake stress. Have you ever played a video game and you're playing a boss and the boss you're like, "Oh god," and you're like anxious cuz this boss might kill you and it's a challenge? Your brain knows you're not really being chased by this boss. You might feel like fake stress or fictional stress, but it's not actual stress. As opposed to you being chased in the woods by a bear, that would be real stress, right? Well, the article and the studies that they were doing said that if you only ever have real stress, work stress, family stress, life stress, if you only have real stress and you never have eustress, which is fake stress for play, your brain gets conditioned to see everything as a real threat. And it's just because of the stimulus that you give it on a daily basis. But if you play a video game or you play a really challenging Warhammer game against an opponent, or you go play in a Magic tournament, or you do whatever, even even weightlifting or exercising is eustress, because sure you're running, but you're not running from a bear, if you follow me. And I feel that eustress comes up more and more often, and that's the whole purpose of our hobby. It might be a real challenge to kit bash a model to make it look the way you want, or it might be a challenge to get all the mold lines off, or to drill your barrels, or to whatever. There's some minor stress there, for lack of a better word, but it's fun and challenging, but it's not life threatening. So you can start seeing that everything's not such a big deal when you start experiencing both real life stress and eustress once you have a hobby. I had decided several years ago, many, many years ago, I was into the hobby too much. I was spending every night, at the kitchen counter assembling models. I was painting models. I was writing articles. I was doing this. I was just non-stop having friends over to play Warhammer, going to the club to play with Warhammer. And I decided, you know what, for like 2 weeks, I'm just going to cold turkey it. I am not going to touch Warhammer. I'm not going to go to the club or whatever. And those were really, really, like, sad is probably too strong of a word, but they're very like empty weeks. Those couple weeks that I did that. I was just like sitting there, and I'm not like much of a TV watcher, so I'm not watching TV or anything. And I'm just sitting there at the kitchen table, and I'm talking to my wife or talking to my kids, but I'm not doing anything. I'm not engaging myself in any way. I'm not being productive in any way. And this was a long time ago, before I had brutality. Because a lot of my free time is taken up doing brutality, but developing new supplements or editing or whatever. But I just I felt so unfulfilled for those couple weeks, and I was so happy to go back to it and try to restrain myself a bit. I don't have to have people over 4 times a week to play Warhammer, for crying out loud, right? I can still go to the club once a week, and then maybe once a week have a friend over, and not overdo it. But I look at these people that I've had so many fathers of kids who's are friends with my kids, like other kids' parents, tell me, "Oh yeah, I don't have any hobbies." Either I've heard some of them say my wife won't let me have any hobbies, which seems like not that great of a relationship, or sometimes people just blame their spouse, and it's not really their spouse's problem. But or just, I just don't have time. But they look stressed out. They look unhappy. And I'm like, dude, that's not mentally healthy for you. You need to just chill out. And if you want to pick up surfing, go pick up surfing. If you want to go pick up hunting or fishing or literally anything that will get you out of the house, or even if you don't leave the house, find something that will engage you in a fun and meaningful way. Because I'm going to speak in platitudes here, but life is so much better and so much more worth living when you have a hobby and you have something to occupy your time. I think about my hobbies, whether it be Warhammer or Brutality or whatever. I think about it all day at work. While I'm working at work, anytime I have free time and I don't have to actively be thinking about my work, I'm thinking about Warhammer. I'm thinking about Brutality. I'm thinking about some story I'm going to write, or whatever, and it makes your days go by smoother. It makes you a deeper and more multifaceted human being, a better, well-rounded human being if you've got lots of different interests. So I would definitely suggest that for all of you. Make sure you don't lose sight of your hobby. And honestly, I think this does make life worth living. Thank you to GameEt.eu for supporting the show, and Panhandle3D.etsy.com, and all my beautiful, sexy, good smelling Patreon patrons. I will see you next week.